Our guest joining us in studio, we'll call him the globetrotting doctor today because he has been spanning at least the Western Hemisphere. Dr. Jonathan Tripp joining us in studio. Welcome back.
Gracias, muchas gracias.
I was going to say, you took a lot of toiletries down to Nicaragua. Obviously, you gave away even your own.
Yes, yeah, we had a lot of things. We took
No razors for you the last couple of weeks.
no, no. In fact, my wife has told me at least daily since we've been back to get rid of the beard. So, yeah, for those of you that would like to see Dr. Tripp in a beard, you got to do the website after the show to
Yeah.
find the show so you can see it because it'll probably never happen again in my life.
Well, I
So,
was going to say, you now have that look that most of these South American political leaders have.
well, I'm not running for office.
Yeah.
Not yet. Not yet. That's
we're
right.
gonna we're gonna talk actually quite expansively, I think, next week about the trip to Nicaragua. But today's topic relates a little bit to that because we think it's hot here, but we have a low dew point. You are in a part of the world where this time of year it's broiling hot, and yet it's also very sticky as well.
Yeah, real high humidity. In fact, today's topic we've kind of touched on a couple of months ago about um, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and I thought it very timely to bring that up again when we're hitting 100 plus degrees every day this week, or at least most days. And so while being down in Nicaragua, we were doing a lot of heavy labor type work. In fact, my children and I are very good at mixing cement by hand now. But during that time, you had family members and others that were part of this service group that definitely had heat exhaustion or heat stroke is a little bit more severe, but we usually call it heat stroke. And what was interesting to me is I don't have the additional tools that I'd have at my office or at a hospital emergency room. And so I really had to do things like, anybody else that wasn't in a medical profession would do. And so we'll talk about those. But even since I've been back, the experience with heat exhaustion has already occurred again in my own home. So we've had lots of experience, and this makes it very pertinent. And I'll say right up front, the biggest thing we can do about heat exhaustion is preventing it. So we'll talk more about how to do that.
Right away, I was going to point out, I've been bringing in the heavy duty water this week. I sit here, I drink a lot of this during the show just to keep my throat slaked, when I'm on the air. But I'll go through two of these on a hot day like today, even though I'm working inside.
So about how many ounces is that?
I'm going to guess that's about 48.
Yeah, so that's more than, that's about a quart and a half.
And
So if you're
not quite
drinking,
filling it, but close when I do that.
so you're drinking that, so you're getting close to 3 quarts a day, which is exactly what I tell people to target for 3 to 4 quarts a day. Um, with the heat, what's interesting about our environment is because we don't have much humidity, you don't even really detect that you're losing
Hmm.
water through your skin. And when you breathe, you lose a lot of water, especially at these higher temperatures, because your body is doing its best to cool down. And so if you get to the point where you're not sweating, you're in trouble already. So, you're out in the heat and you're not sweating, that's not because, you're tougher than everybody else. It's because you're already in trouble.
I was watching a baseball game from Washington earlier this week where they had the triple digit, but they also had, I think, dew points around 80. So it was very difficult on the players in the dugouts. They were describing this on television. You saw guys being wiped down with towels on their arms and across their foreheads, but these are called ammonia towels,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's done because it says it helps them sweat better and cool off more quickly with a lot of that stickiness in the air.
Well, if you've ever put alcohol on your skin, and almost everybody has, you'll notice there's a cooling sensation, not just a stinging in the cut, but there's a cooling to the skin. So ammonia and alcohol have a much they're more volatile is the term, but they evaporate much more quickly than water does. So what they're doing is they're creating a liquid on the surface of the skin that evaporates better and quicker than sweat does. So it does have a cooling effect.
And that'll keep someone perhaps standing in the outfield sometimes for long periods of the day, perhaps a little. They're not going to suffer heat stroke by the sixth or seventh inning.
Yeah, and this is professional sports doing everything and anything they can to keep the game going on. I would not recommend that to most people that are suffering from you know, overheating. The biggest thing you can do is number one, get out of the heat. Get into an air conditioning building. If you can't get into that, at least get into the shade so you're not having the direct sunlight. and as much fluid as you can get in you. And what we learned while I was down in Nicaragua is, once people were in trouble, you couldn't get enough water in them to keep up with the trouble. You had to get them into a cool environment. And their tummies would get full of water, and you're waiting for that water to be absorbed. And now they're too full. They actually start getting nauseous because they're dehydrated, even though there's a ton of water in their belly. So I was taught by one of the concrete workers from Nicaragua that you should get a salt or electrolyte solution and drink that instead of water. And in my training, well, sounds like we better go come back to that.
Yeah, that's a good topic. We'll get back to that in just a moment as well because you brought up the electrolytes. One of my coworkers says that's a key. So, and he's not even a medical professional. What he's been doing is listening to his doctor, of course. We have more details coming up with Dr. Jonathan Tripp. It's Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. Bill Colley with you as well, answering the telephones this morning. We've got plenty more just ahead. Dr. Jonathan Tripp joining us in studio this morning. It's Better Health with Tripp Family Medicine, which, of course, is located on Fillmore Street directly across from the main post office. That's on the north side of Twin Falls. And just before we went to the break, the doctor was talking a little bit about just consuming water when you're having, issues with heat versus maybe doing a solution with some salts and electrolytes. But interestingly enough, you said a great comment during the break. And I had said something about one of my coworkers' doctors saying, get the electrolytes in you. In this case, it was the opposite.
Yeah, he was listening to his doctor, but I was the doctor listening to the construction worker, the guy that's working cement with me, and he's saying you need to have some pretty heavy amount of salt in what you're drinking, at least to begin with. And here's the reasoning. The salt, or sodium in particular, draws fluid. And so, somebody that has bad high blood pressure, to do a lot of salt will raise their blood pressure because it's maintaining water or fluid in their vessels and puts more pressure on them. So, if somebody has extreme high blood pressure, this wouldn't be a great idea unless they were just, had to be in extreme heat. Then I might say try a little. But the salts that we're looking for, sodium, potassium, and calcium, are the main ones. The sodium helps maintain the fluid. The potassium and calcium are beneficial in helping avoid cramps as a result of water loss. Um, so, in my training, we talked about how when somebody gets dehydrated, they don't lack salt in their vessels, they lack water. So, the primary recovery is water. But if you can't recover enough of the water simply by drinking it, and you don't have IVs available, which is my situation in Central America, you need a part of it, or early on, a salt solution or a saltier solution to draw water into your vessels, and that will speed the recovery. And so I found it interesting that the doctor got taught by the construction worker, and we did that with several people that were suffering from that. And we had the equivalent of about a 103-degree day with over 90% humidity, and the heat index, which to tell everybody, the heat index is what the temperature of the day feels like in the shade, not the direct sunlight. And we were in direct sunlight, but the heat index there was 119 degrees that day. So, made for a tough day. You're sweating profusely. How do you keep that up? And I'll tell you, the one thing that the soda manufacturers will not like me for, and that is avoid caffeinated drinks. They'll say, well, any fluid's good for you. In fact, they lobbied the Congress to say that as part of our recent food guidelines. But caffeinated drinks are diuretics. They cause your kidneys to get rid of more water. So, if you're dehydrated, don't go get a cup of coffee or a Coke. It's fighting the whole process. So, let me tell you about heat exhaustion. When heat exhaustion occurs, your body gets too hot. That's what's going on. And it can be caused by physical exercise, or just simply hot weather, or the combination, which is usually what's going on for most of us. You get heavy sweating, you start feeling weak, and you could get confused. If that's true, you're in real trouble. Dizziness, nausea is very, very common with dehydration. Headache is very common. Your heart rate goes up, and if you do go to the bathroom, you're noticing it's a more concentrated or darker color. Those are all signs that you're losing the battle on the water thing. So the single best thing we can do is prevent. You preload with water, preload with a salt solution or even salt tablets if you know you're going to be exercising or working hard in some very hot weather. And so those are the things that will help you avoid getting behind. And then it's hard to say this or hard to do this, but drinking water every 15 to 20 minutes while you're out there, people say, well, I got to get work done. I can't do that. But you really ought to push it, even if you're not thirsty, because by the time you're thirsty, you may be in trouble. And that's the whole game with dehydration.
We talk a little bit about treating this too. Uh, I mentioned the ammonia towels earlier at the baseball game. You also notice these athletes on really hot days, they have these big misting machines sitting next to them when they're at rest. Now, that's actually, instead of drying them off, but it's actually adding more water to the mix. But what does that do?
Well, there with the misting machine, you have a water temperature that is much cooler than your body temperature, and add a fan to that, and you have greater evaporative or greater evaporation of the water that's on your skin, so it cools the skin surface better. We lived in Arizona for a while, and the misters out on the outdoor decks for the restaurants are wonderful. They're great, but it's because you're getting a cooler temperature fluid on your skin, and even if it doesn't evaporate as well, it's kind of like rubbing you down with a cold washcloth.
We have Dr. Jonathan Tripp in studio with us until 9 o'clock this morning. And the doctor has a telephone call. You're up next. You're on KLIX.
Yeah, good morning. Uh, when I work outside, I sweat. I do not like to drink water at all. When I get real thirsty and I'm sweating, I'm trying to cool off, I drink a lot of milk, and that seems to work for me. Am I doing something wrong? I'll take my answer off the air.
But that's a good question. Are you doing something wrong? The milk has plenty of water in it. It also has sugars that will kind of help you feel better energy. As far as true electrolytes to help maintain the fluid, it has some, but I don't know that I would say it's enough. On the other hand, if that's what you've been doing for a long time, obviously your body's acclimated and uses that pretty well. So no, I wouldn't say that's a bad choice because definitely you're adding um, substantial liquid to your body while you're working.
When I was a kid, we went to a parade and it was a really hot day. And on leaving the parade, they had a stand set up. It was a dairy festival, we should point out. So they were selling milk at the stand. And my mother bought me a glass of it, and it was really, really cold. It was whole milk, really cold. And I remember drinking that down and it having such a cooling sensation. And whether it cooled me down, I don't, yeah, obviously, a little glass of milk isn't going to drop your body temperature much, but I felt great after that.
Well, and the truth is you are cooling down the thing that is hottest, and that's your core. So as you drink and it goes right down your throat into your stomach, you're at the core. So something that's really cold, it makes a big impact. And so that is one of the things that can be done, even in an emergency room situation, is to put cool fluids by way of a tube down your nose and throat to put cold fluid into your belly as well as IV fluids that are room temperature instead of body temperature is another way that we use the ER to try to cool somebody down. But outside of those techniques, cold, cold water towels, kind of like the ammonia idea. I'm not a big fan of the ammonia because I know when we have air conditioning in big plants and the ammonia leaks from there, and that's a real health hazard. So I'd kind of stray away from that. Maybe a little rubbing alcohol mixed with water. And if you want to make it ice water, great, because your job when somebody's in trouble is to get them cooled down, remove excess clothing. Um, there's some other, I mean, you can even get into seizures with heat stroke. So it can get really bad. But most of the time, what we get is a headache, we get sick to our stomach, and we feel really ill or weak. And that usually takes a couple of days of real good hydration and staying in a cool environment to recover from. But then if you go right back out in the heat, you are much more sensitive for about the next week to have it happen again.
And you're going to feel, I'm sure, for 2 days very tired even after going through something like this.
Yeah, it's like you just recovered from the flu.
Yeah,
It's a
I had to cover crime sentencing one time, and the courtroom was so packed, they decided to run wires outside and TV monitors, and we stood outside to record the sound and do those things. And the intense heat. The next morning, I just was barely able to get to work after being out in that heat for about 6 hours.
Yeah, no, we talk about the heat draining your energy. You've been out in the heat. It does, and but many of us learn to work in the heat. And what we're talking about are ways to try to avoid having the heat take us over. Things like light clothing that's loose, hats that are not hot but actually give you a pretty good brim to cover the sun, keep it off your face, your back as much as you can. Because when you get a sunburn, on top of being out in the heat, it multiplies the effect on your body and slows down your recovery.
We've had what 3, 4 generations of people farming in this valley. I'm sure, like the concrete worker, that they've all long ago learned a lot of remedies and means of prevention just simply on their own because trial and error they came up with various things. And my guess is anybody who's been though in the farming business still has those days that come up where it's taxing.
Yeah. And, everybody talks about a cold beer always feels good in the heat. About the worst thing you can do is alcohol because it dilates your blood vessels and brings as much of your blood supply to the surface where the heat is where the sun's beating on you. And so oftentimes people that have suffered, serious effects or even death from heat stroke had the combination of not only the environment but the alcohol on board.
And for people who are already at that point or reaching that point where the dizziness comes in and the nausea comes in, what should happen? I mean, at that point.
Well, at that point, it sounds like they still could do this on their own, cooling themselves down, even a cold bath. Lots of fluid is the key in taking time to recover. But if you get to the point where you truly are not sweating, you're getting disoriented, especially if your own temperature is rising 102, 103 without you being ill, that's time to go to the emergency room because if you get past 104, you actually are killing some of your organs or doing damage at least, and that's lifelong troubles.
How many people have probably done that and not even been aware of it though in their lives?
I don't have any idea. I really don't. But some people will say, "Oh, I had heat stroke and when I was, 22, and I still am sensitive to the sun at age 40." There may be a lot of truth to that because of having a more severe form of heat stroke at that time.
And when you get to the ER, I mean, at that point, it's just basically trying to put people in an ice bath or something
Yep.
in order to cool them down.
Yeah, IVs, water in the belly, cool towels, anything we can do to just chill them out.
Now, I had a friend who was doing the same thing you were last week, but he was in Uganda. And he said that they were literally praying for afternoon thunder showers to cool things down
Yes,
because the couple of days it did rain, it was a real relief to what they were doing.
we had the same experience. First couple of days, just real wonderful heat if you were trying to get out of the winter, but unrelenting if you were working out in the sun. And then we had thunderstorm come in off of the ocean, and it was amazing. Just the clouds coming over changed the heat dramatically, and then after raining, we had probably a 10-degree drop just by having that storm come through.
We don't get those too often here, so we don't have that advantage. We're going to squeeze one last question, and we've only got about a minute to go. You're up next. You're on the air with Dr. Jonathan Tripp.
Dr. Tripp, I've got a question about children with brain injuries that tend to overheat easily. Is there anything we can do to be able to get out and about when it's hot like this, or do we just have to stay in?
Wow, that's a good one, and
Mm-hmm.
it depends on the severity of the brain injury. But again, I guess what I would attempt to do is make sure you're doing all the things you do for yourself, the loose clothing, well covered with a hat that's light. But I would try a little bit of the electrolyte, and I'm not talking about just Gatorade or Powerade. Those are good beginnings, but if you had that, I'd probably, if you had a liter of that, I'd probably add a quarter or a half teaspoon of table salt to it and have that as a preemptive fluid and kind of just be real careful, watching, monitoring what's happening. But that would be my best solution. And then to have something that you can cool with as you go. I just think of these cool little devices we used to have at our house that were a spray bottle with a fan on them. You don't have to buy that, but that's the general idea that you're constantly cooling that child, and I think you could work around it.
I want to thank him for the call. And before we wrap up, got a few seconds left. People who'd like to get in touch with your office, how do they go about doing it?
Oh, sure. Our phone number, 208 933-4400. And our website is trippfamilymedicine.com. And Facebook, Tripp Family Medicine. Love to hear from you.
We've got another hour of top story coming up. Bill Colley with you on that. We want to thank Dr. Jonathan Tripp and welcome him back, of course, to town. In fact, we'll talk to him again next week about some of the particulars about his visit to Nicaragua. That will be coming up a little later next week, right here on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. News is next from Fox.